Akhenaten didn't start off as the radical pharaoh we know today. Originally called Amenhotep IV, he ruled just like his father, Amenhotep III. But in the 5th year of his reign, he shook up Egypt's traditions. Changing his name to Akhenaten, he built a new capital, Akhenaten, and promoted Aten, the sun disk, as the central deity of Egyptian worship. But where did this revolutionary idea come from? It turns out Akhenaten wasn't entirely original. His father, Amenhotep III, had already elevated Aten's importance, even calling himself the dazzling sun disk. Akhenaten, however, took things further. He banned the worship of traditional gods like Amun and Osiris, and made Aten the sole focus. While Amenhotep III embraced Aten within Egypt's polytheistic framework, Akhenaten's total religious overhaul earned him the title of heretic. So, why did Akhenaten risk so much for Aten? Some say it was a power play to curb the influence of the Amun priests, who had grown wealthy and powerful. Others believe Akhenaten might have been a true monotheist, paving the way for later figures like Moses. Akhenaten's reign has left scholars debating. Was he truly Egypt's first monotheist, or was he simply trying to restore an ancient, misunderstood tradition? Many Western historians portray the ancient Egyptians as polytheists. But when we dig deeper into their writings, we see a different picture. The Egyptians believed in a single creator, often referred to by names like Imana, Amun, or Ra. The so-called gods, like Isis, Osiris, and Thoth, were actually aspects of this one creator, much like the different faces of a diamond. But what was Akhenaten really trying to do? Was he creating a new religion? Was he introducing a new god, Aten? Or was he trying to replace Kemet's belief in many gods with the worship of one god, as many people believe? The confusion often comes from the way Kemetic civilization has been portrayed, especially by Western scholars and media. Many have claimed that the ancient Egyptians practiced polytheism, the worship of many gods. However, a closer look at the ancient texts and writings from all periods of Egyptian history will reveal something different. The people of the Nile Valley always spoke of one God. They believed that this creator was beyond human understanding, hidden and invisible, because our senses limit us. The ancient Egyptians viewed the creator like a diamond with many sides, each representing different ways the creator interacted with the world. These different aspects of the one God were known by names like Osiris, Isis, Thoth, and Ra. These were not separate gods, but different ways in which the creator was understood. The Egyptians called these aspects Neteru or Encheru, which means divine manifestations. It's important to understand that despite what many people have been taught, the beliefs of ancient Egyptians were actually monotheistic. According to this view, which is shared by many African cultures, the creator is seen as the conscious energy of the entire universe. Since energy is not something we can touch or see, and God doesn't speak to us directly, the creator is considered hidden and invisible. This is why the ancient Egyptians called the creator names like Imana, Amen, or Amun, which mean the hidden one. The creator works through different forms in creation. For example, when the creator provides energy to the world, especially through sunlight, he or she is known as Ra. When the creator represents goodness, he or she is called Osiris. When showing love, the creator is known as Isis, and when acting with justice, the creator is called Ma'at. These different forms or aspects of the creator are called Netjeru, singular Netjer, in the ancient Egyptian language. So, when we hear names like Osiris, Isis, or Anubis, these aren't separate gods in a polytheistic sense. Instead, they are different expressions of the one creator, Imana or Amen. Each of these manifestations has its own role and importance in both the visible and invisible worlds. So when Akhenaten, who grew up in this culture, became pharaoh, it's difficult to see how he could have suddenly introduced monotheism, since the belief in one creator had always been present in the Nile Valley. Let's look at a text from the ancient Egyptian Leiden papyrus, known as Praise to Amun. It says, One is Amun, who is hidden from them without knowing its true aspect. This clearly shows that the Creator is hidden, unknowable, and the only one. Another part of the text describes the Creator as mysterious from birth, resplendent in form, a marvelous God of many apparitions, referring to the many ways the Creator shows himself. Remember that these manifestations of the Creator do not represent gods, as is wrongly interpreted by Western historians, specifically European and Arab Egyptologists. So, the beliefs of ancient Egyptians were monotheistic. Their writings and art always spoke of one god who revealed himself in different forms, like Isis, Osiris, Thoth, and Ra. But why do some historians and documentaries still claim that Egyptians believed in many gods? It's partly because major religions like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam say that the one God first revealed himself to Abraham. According to this view, before Abraham, people, including the Egyptians, believed in many gods and practiced idolatry. If it's recognized that monotheism existed long before in Egypt, it challenges the idea that Abraham was the first to know the one true God. This could have huge implications, as billions of people both inside and outside Africa follow these religions. Cheikh Anta Diop, in his book Nations Négres et Culture, pointed out that monotheism in all its abstraction already existed in Egypt. This means Akhenaten didn't invent monotheism, as is often claimed. In fact, the name Aten, which Akhenaten used, was mentioned in Egyptian texts over 1,000 years before his reign. Aten, like Ra, was one of the names for the sun, which represented God's light on earth. So Akhenaten wasn't creating something new. He was building on existing beliefs. One of the key texts that helps us understand Akhenaten's religious beliefs is the Great Hymn to Aten. In this hymn, Akhenaten emphasizes that the Creator is one, but can appear in many different forms, which was a core belief of the ancient Egyptians. In the hymn, Akhenaten says to God, "You eternally bring forth millions of forms from yourself while remaining one." This shows that Akhenaten wasn't changing the traditional religious teachings. He was simply reaffirming the long-standing belief that while God is one, he shows himself in many ways. Akhenaten's reform, therefore, was not about creating a new belief system, but about returning to the original teachings of the ancestors. According to Cheikh Anta Diop in Nations Négres et Culture, Akhenaten didn't create a new religion. Instead, he was trying to renovate the original Egyptian monotheism, which had been weakened by the influence and corruption of the priests. Akhenaten's goal was to bring back the pure monotheistic beliefs that had long existed in Egyptian civilization. Essentially, his actions were part of a religious reform to restore what he saw as the true spiritual traditions of Egypt. Indeed, texts from this time show that the priests had gained too much power and were using their influence for personal gain. This led to conflicts between the clergy and the royal authority, as the balance of power shifted in favor of the priests. Akhenaten's reform was not just about religion, it was also about politics. By pushing for religious changes, Akhenaten was trying to reduce the influence of the clergy and restore royal control. So, while the reform focused on religion, it was also about power, authority, and fighting corruption. In this sense, Akhenaten's reforms were political and religious. It's important to remember that Akhenaten became pharaoh during the 18th dynasty, a time when Egypt had reached its greatest size under Pharaoh Thutmose III. Through his many battles, Thutmose III had expanded Egypt's borders by conquering the surrounding regions. As a result, when Akhenaten took the throne, there were many foreigners in Egypt, either living there or visiting from the conquered territories. In his prayers, Akhenaten includes these foreigners, showing that he believed the God of his ancestors was not just for the Egyptian people, but for everyone. Akhenaten promoted the idea of religious universalism, a belief in a shared spirituality for all people. This was different from the traditional approach of the ancient Egyptians, who allowed foreigners to practice their own religions without trying to impose Egyptian beliefs on them. Akhenaten's goal was to spread his reformed religious teachings to both Egyptians and the foreign populations living in the country. When he built his new city, Akhenaten, the city of the horizon of Aten, he invited everyone, Egyptians and foreigners alike, to live there if they wished. In ancient Egypt, the relationship with God was based on knowledge. To serve as a priest, one had to have a deep understanding of sacred things. The king, as the highest priest, was supposed to be the only one worshipping God on behalf of the entire country. However, since the king couldn't be everywhere at once, he delegated this responsibility to qualified individuals, creating the clergy. Akhenaten saw himself as the only one who truly knew God and held the divine secrets. Using his royal power, he removed the clergy from their role in worship and declared that the daily rituals they performed in the temples were unnecessary or even forbidden. This stripped the clergy of their religious authority and power, as Akhenaten took over the leadership of worship himself. By presenting himself as the only one with true knowledge of God, Akhenaten positioned himself as the sole person allowed to lead worship, returning to the original belief that the king was the chief priest in Egyptian civilization. Akhenaten positioned himself as the primary source of knowledge about God, essentially introducing the idea of a prophet. In this way, he became the first figure in history to act as a prophet-like leader. He presented himself not only as the king and pharaoh, but also as Horus, the son of Osiris, the son of Ra, and a follower of Mahat, that is, truth and justice. By doing so, Akhenaten invoked the same spiritual principles of his ancestors. In his reform, Akhenaten didn't invent a new religion or god. Instead, he simplified and emphasized the most fundamental elements of the ancient Egyptian monotheistic tradition. His reform was a return to the basics of his ancestors' spirituality, focusing on the essential teachings, while reducing the power of the priests and addressing their corruption. His aim was to restore order in Egypt and spread this simplified, reformed doctrine to both Egyptians and foreigners. Akhenaten remained faithful to ancestral beliefs while acting as a spiritual guide to reshape and clarify them. Do you think Akhenaten was a visionary ahead of his time, introducing monotheism to the world, or was he a ruler consumed by his own desire for power and control? What do you believe was Akhenaten's true motivation? Religious devotion to Aten, or a strategic move to weaken the powerful Amun priesthood? Consider subscribing to this channel if you haven't already. Share this video with like-minded people. Until the lions have their own historians, the tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter.